Hi, and welcome to the Skincarma Pod. I'm Carmine, the creator and voice of the Skincarma blog. With more than 25 years in beauty as a brand builder, copywriter, and skincare junkie, I'm putting my product wisdom and expertise to work demystifying skincare. On today's episode of the Skincarma Pod, we're talking MoCRA again. The Modernization of Cosmetics Regulation Act, better known as MoCRA, was the biggest overhaul of U.S. cosmetic regulation in nearly 80 years. For the first time, brands across the beauty spectrum are required to register their manufacturing facilities, list their products with the FDA, report serious adverse events, and maintain documentation supporting the safety of their formulations. But according to many chemists, formulators, and regulatory experts inside the industry, MoCRA is just the beginning, not the finish line. Today, I'm joined once again by cosmetic chemist and regulatory expert Mark Broussard, founder and managing director of Desert in Bloom Cosmetics Lab. Mark works directly with brand founders to develop and manufacture products, which gives him a front row seat to how regulation actually plays out in the real world. In a recent LinkedIn post that sparked today's conversation, Mark argued that while MoCRA was a step forward, several critical gaps remain, from undefined safety testing requirements to inconsistent manufacturing standards, and importantly, a lack of clear fragrance allergen disclosure rules. So today we're unpacking the big question. If MoCRA was the first step in modernizing beauty regulation, what should the next step look like? Let's do it. Let's welcome Mark back to the pod. Mark, hello, sir.
Hey, Carmine, how are you doing today?
I'm great, thank you. Welcome back.
Pleasure. Third time, if
My
I'm not
first ever
mistaken.
three-time guest.
There you go. Good.
You get the Skin Karma Excellence in Award for coming on and elucidating us with all of your knowledge. So we're going to talk about MoCRA again today, and I think before we jump in, it's certainly possible and probably even likely that most listeners haven't listened to our previous two episodes together. So why don't you reintroduce yourself to the listeners?
Sure. Mark Broussard, my company is Desert in Bloom Cosmetics Lab, and I formulate clean beauty, clinical products, both hair care and skin care. And then I've got a companion company called MoCRA Compliance Lab, where I provide full MoCRA compliance services for companies in the U.S. and serve as the U.S. agent for companies that are selling product in the United States but are not domiciled in the United States.
Got it. All right, so let's jump into our next MoCRA moment and
Hmm.
pick up kind of where we left off. So, just as a reminder, MoCRA was has been described as the biggest update to U.S. cosmetic regulation in nearly 80 years. But many insiders say it's really just laying the groundwork, and you included. Mark, from your perspective as a cosmetic chemist and regulatory expert, what did MoCRA actually change in practical terms for brands and labs like yours?
The biggest change from MoCRA was actually the product registration and facility registration,
Hmm.
where that way the FDA could get their arms around what products are out there, who's making them, where are they making them, and in the event there are any problems like a substantial number of adverse events, then they have a streamlined process to get to the company to address the issue, get to the contract manufacturer to address the issue. And prior to MoCRA, the FDA did not
Mm,
have a recall authority. The FDA now has a recall authority. So those are two of the biggest changes that MoCRA ushered in. The rest of the MoCRA compliance requirements are pretty much codifying things that companies were already doing, but now making
right.
them law, right? So now making
Mm.
them law as opposed to a voluntary industry compliance.
What's an example of that or two?
Well, a couple would be adverse event monitoring, where
Hmm.
companies now have to intake adverse event reports from consumers, be it burning or itching, whelping, any kind of adverse reaction to the use of a cosmetic product. That is now codified, and there's a form that mirrors the drug adverse event forms that you
Ah,
need to
okay.
use, right? And we'll get into safety substantiation,
Yes.
where everybody was practicing, most everybody was practicing, or hopefully everybody was practicing preservative challenge testing, human repeat insult patch testing for allergy and skin reactions, cosmetic ingredient safety reports to understand the toxicity profile or toxicological profile of the ingredients in the product. So those are all now codified but not clearly defined.
Which
Um,
is really the point of your LinkedIn post. And so let's
yes,
just jump into that really. You pointed out that MoCRA requires safety substantiation but never actually defines what that means.
that's correct.
Why do you think that's such a critical omission?
Because the whole idea of MoCRA and the FDA is to protect the consumer from adulterated products, adulterated skincare products or hair care products, and make sure those products are safe. So, by the FDA in on its website talks about preservative challenge testing, talks
Hmm.
about cosmetic ingredient safety report, to take a look at the toxicology of the ingredients in the product. They never mention anything about skin patch testing.
Mm,
So the problem with not defining it, not clearly defining it, is there's an assumption that everybody's going to perform this body of testing to prove that their cosmetic product is safe for consumer use. But by not defining it, it leaves it open as to what a company determines to be safety substantiation. So the biggest problem there is, you know, the FDA could have just said, here's a safety substantiation package we want to see, or dossier we want to see on every product that's out in the market. We want to make sure that you've done preservative challenge testing. We want to see a cosmetic ingredient safety report, and we want to see skin patch testing. And they didn't. I don't know why.
really?
Yeah, it's not
Could you
defined or accepted.
what would you surmise as to the reason they didn't?
There's a couple of possible reasons. One, they may have assumed that most companies are already doing this. Uh,
Hmm.
and we'll get into the small business exempt, which is where there's a
Hmm.
big hole there. And that assumption is really a really bad assumption. Um,
Yeah.
MoCRA is really geared towards regulating two tiers of companies. You have
Okay.
companies that are generating over 1 million a year in revenue, and you
Hmm.
have companies generating less than 1 million a year in revenue. The companies that are generating less than 1 million a year in revenue, or referred to as small business exempt, and they do not have to register their products with the FDA. The problem that creates is you might have a lot of home formulators out there who don't even know that MoCRA exists. They may be
Right.
completely
Yeah.
unaware of MoCRA. They're probably, they may not be complying with MoCRA or partially complying with MoCRA, but they're still able to get their products out into the marketplace. So it's kind of in a bit of a free pass for those small companies. So I
Hmm.
think the logic behind that is the FDA did not want to stifle innovation and small
Right.
companies from coming into the market. but they wanted to lay down that regulatory framework primarily geared towards the larger companies. And the only logic I can, tweeze out of that is perhaps they thought the number of people that might be affected by an improperly formulated or unsafe small business exempt brand is a lot fewer than the larger brands.
Right. But still, it's not zero.
It's not zero. No. And that's a problem. Now, the weird thing about it is small business exempt are required to comply with every mandate of MoCRA. The only exemption is that they don't have to register their products with the FDA. And that fundamentally to me doesn't make much sense.
Do they also have to report adverse events?
They have to report adverse events.
And they have to register their packaging.
No, they don't have to register their packaging. The only exemption is they don't have to register the product with the FDA. Okay, they can if they want to, but if it's someone who is manufacturing at home, right?
Right. Not using a regulated formulator or registered formulator like yourself.
Correct.
Yeah.
If you are not using a contract manufacturer who is registered with the FDA to manufacture your products, you cannot register the products with the FDA. The first component of it is who's making your product, where are they located, give us their detailed information. So if someone is making self-manufacturing in their garage, right, they really can't register register their products with the FDA. The problem that creates is you might have, 1 million people making stuff in their garage who the FDA is unaware of, who may or may not know what they're doing from a product development formulation perspective. And that's where you're most likely to find problems with sanitary manufacturing conditions, people following good manufacturing practices, etc. So the FDA just doesn't have a way to figure out who these people are unless there are enough consumer complaints directly to the FDA from
about that specific brand or product.
About that specific brand or product. Yeah. That's the only mechanism the FDA has for figuring out who these people are.
Is the biggest risk, you kind of alluded to this, but is it about microbial contamination because of the presence of water in skincare products?
Yeah, that's exactly it. The biggest problem is they may not know that a product needs to be tested. You need to perform a preservative challenge test. They could be putting products out onto the market that do become contaminated in use, right?
Right.
The other problem with that is if they're using ingredients that have use restrictions, like maximum level use restrictions, they may be including those ingredients at higher than the regulatory use restriction. Let's say, glycolic acid, typically 10% your upper limit. They might be putting 20% glycolic acid in there. And there's no way that a consumer is going to know that there's that much glycolic acid in that product. So it's the risk of contamination and, quote unquote, adulterated products that contain ingredients that could be harmful to the skin at higher than allowed percentages.
Can you walk me through, I think we might have done this before, but can you walk me through again how product safety unfolds in the development process?
Sure. The first thing you do when you're developing a product is the first thing I do is run a cosmetic ingredient safety report where I lay out the formula, I tap
Mm-hmm.
into a toxicology database, which and input that formula into that database, including ingredient percentages. It will then generate a report for me on each individual ingredient, given the genotoxicity, if there's ocular irritation, if there's a chance of skin irritation, etc., and if there are limits on the use of that ingredient. So that's the first thing that you do to make sure that you're formulating and creating a product that falls within the proper guidelines. And then, it's a professional assessment as to whether that combination of ingredients will be safe.
Right.
The next thing, then you formulate the product. The next thing you do is send it off for preservative challenge testing to make sure that it does not develop microbial growth during use. And then the third thing is normally do some skin patch testing. It's called the human repeat insult patch test.
RHIPT. Yeah.
Yes. And that's looking for skin sensitization, allergic reaction, or just a skin reaction, not an allergy per se, but an irritancy reaction. Once you've done that and passed all of those three, then you can say, yes, this product is safe for use by consumers. So that's the process that you'll go through. Yeah, that's the process you'll normally go through.
One of the more interesting points to me that you made is that retailers, especially marketplaces like Amazon, should be required to provide safety documentation before allowing products to be sold. Why do you think retailer accountability could be one of the most effective ways to improve product safety? And just to me, it seems like that's the last chance to catch something, but maybe is that the point?
Yeah, that's the point, is the retailers are the gatekeepers between the brand and the consumer, right? So someone like, I've got clients that onboard and onto Amazon, and Amazon is always requesting safety data sheets. A safety data sheet is used for shipping of hazardous materials, and it tells you what to do in the event of a spill, right? But it has very little to do with the safety of that product for use by consumers. So the way you can prevent products that are not safe from getting onto the market, products that are counterfeits from not getting onto the market, right? And that's a huge issue. There's much more counterfeit product out there than people realize. But if
on Amazon particularly, right? I would think.
Correct. Because to get onto Amazon, all they're requiring is a safety data sheet. And I can generate a safety data sheet by just typing stuff in, right? It's not a third-party validation. I just pull up the safety data sheet software and put in the ingredients, and now I have a safety data sheet. So literally anyone can generate a safety data sheet for a product. All they need is a template. So that's how a lot of counterfeit products get up onto Amazon, because the counterfeiters are just typing up a safety data sheet, right?
Wow.
However, if Amazon and other retailers were to require, we want to see your safety data sheet, we want to see your preservative challenge test, we want to see your HRIP test, and we want to see a cosmetic ingredient safety report. Now it's one, they've got the documentation that validates true safety. And two, if you're a counterfeiter, you're not going to have these third-party lab reports validating the HRIP or whatever the case may be. I mean, so all Amazon needs to do is double check those if they want to, call up the PCT lab, call up the HRIP lab, validate it, and now you've got a really good lock on improperly unsafe products getting onto the marketplace and counterfeit products getting onto the marketplace. That just leaves direct to consumer on the brand's website as their only
Hmm.
option to get out into the marketplace without anyone checking on their safety substantiation.
Oh, right, of course.
Yeah,
So so you feel, and I guess my impression is there is no incentive for Amazon to be policing that.
no,
Amazon would lose business if that were the case. So the point is, if MoCRA would simply require that, then we
yeah,
wouldn't have this issue.
correct.
Yeah, yeah,
They would have no choice, right? You know,
yes, yes,
they've got to collect this documentation. Um, and that's the only way to do it is to regulate it. Because if Amazon were interested in collecting this information, they'd already be doing it, and they're
yeah.
not, right?
One of the biggest lapses I think in MoCRA that you called out was the lack of regulation on fragrance allergens.
Yes,
And so
yeah,
we know that the EU, and thankfully California, like the EU expanded its list of fragrance allergens to 82 compounds, and California kind of adopted similar rules. Why,
yes.
why do you feel fragrance allergen disclosure is such an important consumer safety issue if brands are kind of policing themselves in that regard anyway?
Yeah, because most consumers are going to have an irritancy reaction or an allergic reaction due to the fragrance.
Hmm.
So
As opposed to contamination.
uh, yeah, contamination. You're talking about microbial contamination.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, contamination is very difficult. Unless you're growing mold and you open the jar and it's black and green and
yeah,
white. You've
yeah.
got mold on top of it. That's easy for a consumer to spot.
Right.
Um, Microbial contamination with bacteria is very very difficult to spot as a consumer with their by eyeballing it, right?
Hmm.
They may use the product, and if they get it into a cut, they may develop an infection, but they're not going
Right.
to necessarily know that unless it's a mold or yeast type contamination. um, so yeah, more people, it's more likely that people are going to have reactions to fragrance allergens than they will have issues with a contaminated product, right?
Got it. They're much more common.
Much more common. Correct.
And I would think probably even more likely for one of those, people that you gave as an example developing products in their garage, or they're
Yes.
probably more likely their kitchen, right?
It,
Like using these fragrance allergens in their products, or ingredients that could cause allergic reactions.
yes, that's much more common in that small
Yeah.
business exempt
Yep.
category because
Yeah.
small business exempt. I would suspect a small percentage of those companies actually run a trip testing to look for
Hmm.
irritancy or allergy. And if they're using fragrances, that's going to be your most common culprit.
Mm, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, let's segue to the one of my favorite topics that we've ever talked about, and it's the 1% rule.
Yes.
We had an entire episode about this, so we don't
Yeah.
need to go, too deep into it, but you've been outspoken about the FDA's ingredient labeling rule that allows ingredients under 1% to be listed in any order, which,
Correct.
kind of leaves everybody open to, you know, misrepresenting the efficacy or potency of their product.
Yes.
So I guess reiterate why you believe the 1% rule can be misleading, but most important, what would more transparent labeling look like?
Yeah. Uh, more transparent labeling would look like the Latin American labeling scheme, where you
Hmm.
have to list each ingredient by order of inclusion on a percent weight basis. So, you'll look at an ingredient label and A before B before C before C, those are higher concentrations. With the 1% rule in the US and EU, you have to list in descending order by weight percent inclusion until you get to 1%. Once you
Hmm.
get to 1%, you can label those ingredients in any order you want. So, for example, I can take a very expensive ingredient that's a really popular ingredient, let's say retinol. I can
Hmm.
include retinol at 0.001% in the formula, and I can put it at the very top of the 1% rule. So instead, in Latin America, that retinol at that lower percentage would, probably be the very last ingredient. Uh,
Right.
in the United States, I can actually probably put it somewhere towards the middle of the deck, making it
Mm.
look like, wow, there's, retinol. There's a lot of retinol in here when there's actually none. So
Right.
yeah, yeah. So that's the game that can be played with the 1% labeling rule. Uh, in Latin America, you can't get away with that. Retinol, if it's the least included ingredient, will be at the end of the ingredient deck.
I think
Um,
that's something that most consumers have no concept about. And
no,
we talked about this, if I recall, in our podcast about specifically about this, that um it really does promote duping, or
yeah,
at least the duping of products, and then creating a weaker version
correct.
of
Yes.
maybe a popular product, right? Because
Yep.
you just need to worry about those first few ingredients until you get to the 1%, then everything else can be in any order.
In any order, correct. So it enables people to create really weak, inefficient dupes, but make
Hmm.
them look as though they would perform as well as the original product.
Yeah. Yeah. And in a consumer shopping on Amazon, like I've kind of been guilty of this myself. Not with sunscreen, of course, but yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
they
what
would not.
what
They have no way of knowing, right?
Yeah. I think the consumer piece of it is so fascinating to me. And like for the average consumer, regulation like this feels abstract,
Mhm.
non-transparent. They have no idea what's going on. What do you think are the biggest misconceptions that consumers have about how cosmetic products are regulated?
I think consumers probably don't have an understanding of how many loopholes and ineffective the regulations can be the way they're laid out.
Mm,
Particularly on the small business exempt end of the spectrum. Um, I think consumers assume that there's much tighter, more stringent regulation than there actually is. MoCRA was a nice first step forward. There's still a lot of big
80 years in the
holes in it.
making.
Yeah,
Yeah.
80 years in the making. There's still a lot of big holes in it that doesn't make it really as airtight, so to speak, as it should be. And if the whole objective is to protect consumer safety, and consumers have a good idea of what products they're buying, you're buying what it says it is, it makes sense to close up all these holes in MoCRA. And
Yeah.
the FDA is going to need, in my opinion, it's going to need the retailers to be the policeman, or to help
Mm,
out being the policeman, because the FDA can't monitor all of it by itself. Um,
yeah.
there's a good balance in there to enhance consumer safety without really requiring much more in the way of regulatory requirements. Now,
I have one last question for you. MoCRA before we move into our favorite part of the podcast, which is the lightning round. Um, if regulators were listening to this conversation right now, of course, I'd probably have the most successful skincare related podcast in America. But what single change would you want them to hear that you think they could make to MoCRA tomorrow that would actually improve consumer safety?
That would be pulling the retailers into the equation, making the
Mm,
retailers collect the safety substantiation data uh, in order to be listed in their program. That would be
yeah.
the most significant change.
All right, Mark. Is there anything we didn't touch on that you want to raise before we get into the lightning round?
No, we did a good coverage of all of the the areas where there can be some improvement.
Awesome, and thanks for that LinkedIn post.
Sure.
It prompted this, and it's just really smart. And I always appreciate your insights, particularly in these areas that are they're so muddled, and there are very few
Yeah.
real experts out in the industry. So I appreciate you coming on.
Pleasure. Thank you.
All right, let's do our fun lightning round. For people who can't see what's going on here, I have the cat who is completely awake now, walking in front of the mic. So this is a good time to almost wrap up before he hits stop on the recording. Um, so for the lightning round, first question: your go-to comfort food?
Oh God. That would be that would be probably mac and cheese.
Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
Okay.
When you're feeling
Okay.
bad, a little mac and cheese always lifts your spirit.
The coolest skincare product you ever made?
Oh, it's called, and you've experienced this product, Suprare, which
Ah,
is a
yes.
yeah, which
From
is a
Editrix. Yes.
yes, which is a proprietary microbiome technology spray for the skin, and it's just an amazing product.
Yeah, Dahlia, that you introduced Dahlia and me, and those products are her products, her Editrix products are pretty amazing. Super Rare is
Yeah,
incredible. It's a fermented like face spray, like
yeah,
fermented
yeah,
toner in a spray format.
yes.
Incredible product. I love that. Wow, I have to
Yeah,
let her know that you said that was the coolest product you ever
yeah,
made.
yeah. We have some more products coming out here soon, and
Yay.
yeah, and she's making some good progress in the marketplace.
Yep.
In talks with a real high end retailer for an exclusive. So
Cool.
Dahlia's
That's
doing
so
great.
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Something small in your daily routine that recenters you.
Oh well, I get up at literally 4 every morning, and I
You
was
beat me by an
trained.
hour. Uh-huh.
Yeah, I was trained by my dog to wake up at 4, and it just is, he as a puppy wanted to treats at 4 in the morning, so he would paw me and wake me up. So I get him treats, and then he goes back to sleep. And then I move on with the rest of the day. I make some coffee and start checking emails and stuff like that. So that simple little thing of my dog training me to get up at 4 and give him some treats is a great opportunity to wake up, get prepared for the day, uh, get ready for the sun to rise, and watch the
Mm.
sunrise. So that's kind of my holy part of the morning.
That and amazing how pets have that effect on you, right? My cat does the
Yep.
same thing for me every morning.
Every morning, exactly.
A city you always love returning to and why?
Oh, I saw a movie last night.
Oh,
Yes, Istanbul, Turkey. Just
oh
an amazing,
wow.
yeah, just an amazing city.
Yeah.
It's the kind of three cultures colliding, separated
Yes.
by the river,
Hmm.
and just a great place. Really, I really love it.
It is beautiful, and the former capital of the Eastern Roman Empire. It's an
Yes, yeah,
incredible city.
yeah,
Incredible. I
it
love
really is.
Istanbul. Yeah. A hobby or interest outside of chemistry and skincare.
Ooh, Lord. I need to think about what I do when I'm not doing skincare. Uh, well, I do. Um, I guess it would be writing.
Oh.
I have always wanted to, write a movie script, and I
Mm.
have. So that's probably the one thing I really enjoy doing because it's all creative, and you're a writer,
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, yeah. So I've just get some ideas for comedies that I think would be funny, and you know if it if I never go anywhere with it, at least I enjoy doing it. Right?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
I amuse myself.
That's how I am with formulating products. We're good.
Oh,
We're like, like we're
yep,
simpaticos in this way.
yep,
I
yep.
focus on my writing and you focus on formulating, but we dabble in these other two things.
Exactly, exactly.
That's
Yes.
so interesting. Mark, last question. Finish this sentence. Most people would be surprised to learn that I.
Mm, my Let me think about that. Uh, most people would be surprised to learn that I have done many different things professionally in my life.
Mm-hmm.
I get pigeonholed a lot as a cosmetic chemist, but I spent some time in venture capital and business development. I get involved in a lot of startups. So probably that whole business side of my life would surprise people who really focus on, oh, you're a cosmetic chemist.
Didn't you also dabble in fashion photography at one point?
Yep, fashion photography, exactly. Yes, that would be
You see?
that would be an even bigger surprise
It surprised me when you mentioned it the
yep,
last time.
yep, that I was
Amazing.
a fashion photographer, exactly.
Amazing. Oh, Mark, this was great. Thank you again so much for inspiring this conversation and agreeing to come on and
Yeah,
delving further.
yeah, perfect. Hopefully, we can get the attention of some regulators, Carmine, and some of these things might happen. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And before 80 years are up, because I don't know if the two of us will be around for it.
No, we won't.
It's quite unlikely. All right.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mark.
Okay, great, Carmine. Thank you so much. Always a pleasure.
Same. Ciao.
Okay, ciao. Bye bye.
All right. Thank you for listening to the Skin Karma Pod. Find more insights, real talk, and reviews of my favorite skincare products on the Skin Karma blog at skinkarma.com. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please rate and review this episode. It helps me to reach more listeners. Ciao.